Hello, everyone. I'm Johnny at the Authors Guild Foundation, and we're here today for a Money Matters event. This one is Reaching Influencers with a Marketing Partner. We'll be talking about the process of reaching book reviewers and influencers, virtual book clubs, and other such ways that you can promote your book, perhaps with the help of what's called a marketing partner or consultant. Our special guest today is Mackenzie Newcomb, the founder of Top Shelf Book Consulting, a marketing agency that works in partnership with authors to expand the reach of their books on social media. Prior to that, she created Bad Bitch Book Club, a virtual book club with over 25,000 members worldwide. Originally from the South Shore of Massachusetts, Mackenzie lives in Manhattan. Erin Lowry is the author of the four-part Broke Millennial series. If you've watched our webinars, you probably know Erin by now, but if not, she's an excellent financial translator, I believe she likes to say. Her work's appeared widely in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Rachael. She has she's been a columnist for Bloomberg Opinion, has a Substack, and all sorts of things. I'll go ahead and turn it over to them for this wonderful conversation. And if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A box here in Zoom, and we'll get to those toward the end of the hour. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Johnny. And hi, everyone. Wonderful to be back with you. Now, I don't know about all of you, but each time that I have told a non author about submitting my final manuscript to an editor, I've been met with some variation on the theme of, wow, at least the hard part is done. And as we all know, hardly. Frankly, writing the book usually feels like the easiest part of the process compared to promotion and marketing because at least you have some semblance of control over the writing process. Now, in house marketing and publicity teams, even with the biggest publishing houses, are usually overworked and not necessarily able to commit the kind of quality time needed to get you really big results. So, this is why authors are often told to use some of their advance to hire a publicist if you're traditionally published and have one, or be prepared to financially invest yourself if you're going the self published route. And publicists can range dramatically in price and obviously without guaranteeing a result. Now, those of you who have watched our webinar about how to DIY your own book launch, whether self published or traditionally, you may have first been introduced to the concept of a marketing partner there. And if you haven't watched it, highly recommend to watch it after today's discussion. We'll drop a link in the chat. We know from experience that our own focus has shifted away from traditional media and onto social media in many ways, particularly for younger markets. So an influencer marketing partner can help you get your book in the hands of Book Talk, which is on TikTok, build strategic partnerships with companies, and navigate through the world of virtual book clubs. So I'm so excited to have Mackenzie here today to get started and tell us all about this brave new world. So Mackenzie, starting with, how are you and other marketing agencies and partners different from publicists?
Hi, Erin. Thanks so much for having me. So, of course, we all know that publicists traditionally work with trad media, magazines, newspapers, and I would say even like TV placements and podcasts. So we don't necessarily replace them. They're still useful, but what marketing partners can do is they can work with you to make sure that your books are in the hands of influencers who are really moving the needle now as far as book sales go. Book sales have been up, as I'm sure many of you know, year after year since right before the pandemic. And I don't think that that is coincidental with the rise of Book Talk. And so even though sometimes we have similar results, so for example, even though my client last summer didn't work with a publicist because of the organic traction she got on social media, she did find herself with some really fantastic magazine placements. Our goal is mostly to build relationships with influencers to help promote your book. That's me specifically. So I do think that it's worth kind of differentiating my specific company from maybe some other marketers. So my company is called Top Shelf Book Consulting, and that's because I bridge the gap between luxury marketing and book marketing, which is previously something that couldn't be further apart, although I would argue what's more luxurious than 8 to 12 hours to read a book. So something I do is relationship build with these influencers by hosting them at cocktail parties or intimate dinners so that they feel really connected to the author, in addition to regular influencer mailers and specialty ones for people who really want to post about the book. So that's kind of a little bit of a differentiation between my company and a regular agency, which could do anything from helping you build your website to working on paid ads and building your newsletter for you. So I mean, there's so much that marketing has to offer. It is really so broad that each individual company might be a little bit different.
Now, we had somebody submit a question early that I thought was very interesting. And that person had heard that social media followers don't generally convert to book sales, which we all know can be true. So does that make social media actually a difficult or poor place to put your marketing dollars? How do you kind of bridge this idea between just because somebody has a big following doesn't necessarily mean it will convert to sales?
I mean, here's the thing. Where are people spending their time? They're spending their time on social media. We know that to be true, right? So if you put a book out there and it's just not a book that's going to gain organic traction because people aren't that interested in it, then no matter where you put your money in, it's not going to make a difference as far as selling your book goes. But the eyes are on social media. They're not on traditional media anymore. And so it is more valuable. Now, granted, as we all know, someone has to see something several times before they're likely to pick it up. So it's really hard to measure direct sales from social media, with the exception of, affiliate links, I suppose. But based on everything that we've seen so far, it is a pretty important place to put your money.
I agree. I also just want to point out the thing that's great about whether it's social media or even just anywhere online, people can then just click, as opposed to having to hear about it on TV or even sometimes on a podcast. And then, oh, you have to go back and remember to look it up and find the thing. So that is always something to consider. True. Now, in these conversations too, I think a lot of times we really focus on traditionally published authors when we talk about publicity and marketing, but obviously it's incredibly important for self-published. So could you share a little bit about your clients? Have they all been traditionally published, or does it make sense as an investment for a self-published author?
So I love working with self-published authors because oftentimes there's a shared investment in the success of the book. So last summer, I partnered with someone who was releasing a romance novel, I would say it's on the verge of romance and women's fiction. And she paid an upfront fee, but then we also had an agreement, and the upfront fee was a little discounted because I knew her personally ahead of time and she was kind of taking a chance on a new business of mine. But an upfront fee could be probably around $2,000 to $5,000. So not crazy. And then from there, I got 8% of her book sales. Now, she had a large social media following. So I was willing to say 8% made sense to me because her following was about the same size as my own. So I knew that the book would be successful probably no matter what. And now she has many, many more followers than me because she took my TikTok tip and really put them into action. But if I were to work with somebody who did not already have a following, I would charge something closer to 25% of their book sales, the profit, to kind of make sure that I would get paid out from it. And I would only work with an author whose book I had already read at that point because I'm putting so much of an investment into it and really, really believed in. So I think it's very valuable for both. I think with the traditionally published authors, I often work with authors who feel like their team over at the publishing house isn't really prioritizing their book and they just want to put a little bit of their own money into it to ensure that it's a success. I have an upcoming client who got a 7-figure book deal from Simon & Schuster, and she wants to make sure that she gets a second book deal because it's going to be really hard to prove that that was a good investment. And that's why she wants to work with a marketing partner. So everyone has kind of different reasons to do so. Another reason they might want to work with me specifically is because I do throw events, and oftentimes publishing houses don't necessarily have the budget, but they might want to invest that in themselves and know that I can make sure that they have a guest list that would make it worth their own investment. So there is definitely a need for it no matter how you are publishing your book.
Well, a lot of questions, obviously, around this topic is price. How much does it cost to hire somebody to help you? So, what would you say somebody should expect to pay for an influencer marketer? And then, how does that maybe compare to traditional publicists?
I would say budget 10 to 20% of your advance, depending on just how much you want to invest. But 10% is probably the minimum, just because if you want to work with somebody who's going to really prioritize you, you need to be you need to pay. You need to pay so that they feel it is worth their time. So yeah, so it's somewhere between 10 to 20%. And also if you are an indie / self-published author, expect to pay some sort of upfront fee, but there is always the benefit for them to negotiate a percentage of sales just so that you can kind of know that you're going to be working on it together.
Now, I do actually want to pull in a question we had come in because it's relevant to what you were just saying. You mentioned events, which, as someone who's hosted events before too, I think a great way to convert sales and get things excited. But are those included in the fee for like your pricing model, or is that something that in addition to hiring, you would need to be putting money aside for an event?
That's a good question. So unlike a publicist who charges a retainer, I charge by service and I will do it hourly, right? So I'll tell you, hey, look, I charge $250 an hour. This is how many hours I expect this to take. And then that's what I commit to price wise. So even if it takes me 12 hours and I say it's going to take 10, you're paying for the 10 hours that you committed to. No, events can be really expensive, especially planning them in the city. The minimum budget you would need to throw like a 50-person event in New York City is $3,000, like absolute minimum. And that's for a more casual event. To have like a nicer event, it's going to cost you about $7,000. So no, it's definitely not included in what I would charge as the planner.
Now, within all of this, are influencers charging on top of hiring somebody to help with marketing?
So this is the thing. If you are gifting someone a book, they are of no obligation to post about it. And that's why they're not going to charge you. It's very, very, very rare for a book influencer to say, hey, I'd love to post about this. It's going to cost you $1,000. If they do that, then I mean, it's just not worth it because you want them to give an honest review, right? You want them to give an honest, passionate review because obviously they loved your book because you wrote a great book. And if it's shown as an ad, it's just not as meaningful. That said, if you do want to ensure that someone posts about your book, you can pay them to do so. And the average cost would be about $1,000 per every 100,000 followers someone has. Now, that could range, for example, I have 80,000 followers on TikTok and I would charge $2,000. And the reason I would do that is because my reviews, like, they mean a lot to people. They mean a lot. They push sales, and I'm only going to do it if I'm sure I like your book. I'm going to read the book first. And I know that I convert. So my rate is high, right? I don't need to be doing these ads because I have a marketing company, but I will do them for a cost. The average rate, however, is about $1,000. That said, that is really rare and not something that you necessarily need to count into your budget unless there is someone very specific that you really, really want to review your book.
So just to summarize, we are not necessarily paying influencers on top of. In fact, probably we don't, unless there's maybe one or two people very specifically that you're pretty convinced will convert, and that for you will move the needle and it makes sense.
Period. Yes.
Now, for authors who are on a stricter budget, and we're going to come back a little bit to fees because we have a lot of questions coming in around fees, particularly for indie authors. So if you're somebody who's decided, I'm going to try to bootstrap this a little bit, I just do not have it in my budget to be able to hire somebody, do you have recommendations at all for the author reaching out directly to the influencers?
Oh, absolutely. I'll tell you exactly what I do. It'll just take you a while to do it, okay? So you want to create a spreadsheet with someone's name, their contact information, their handle, and then notes about what you like about their content and why you think that they would be a good fit for your book. So say they are, for just to make it easy for now, because we'll talk about the other alternative later. So if they're a book reviewer, right? find other books that are comp titles for yourself or a book that you also have enjoyed, watch their review, see what they said about it, and take notes on it. So when you send them an email, it's really specific to why they should want to review your book, because likely they're getting many emails about inquiries and they're going to want something that's really specific to them. Otherwise, they're just going to ignore it. The other thing you should definitely consider is making an email address that is not just your personal email address to reach out to people. It could be like assistant at whatever your name is, like author name or whatever the book name is, .com, and just be your assistant. Why not, right? Just be your own assistant. You basically are doing the assistant work, and send the emails through that. But I really can't stress this enough. Because you're already going through the effort of reaching out to these people, you should be as personalized as possible in the emails.
Do you have recommendations on how to even find influencers? Like if you're someone who maybe is kind of new to, you use social media, but you've never really been on the influencer side, you don't totally understand what that means. How do you even find an influencer to begin with or
Yeah.
identify who one is?
Yes. Okay. So start by looking up, okay. So if we're on TikTok, search one of your comp titles. So, okay. One of my favorite books recently was, called Annie Bot. So Annie Bot book review. Okay. If you put this in the search bar, a bunch of videos will come up of that review. So watch that first person's video because it's the comp title, right? And start recording them. Then send them a follow request or a follow. I'm sorry, you don't have to request. Follow them. Now, even if you don't want to join social media, you don't have to. You can have a user 16, some fake name that TikTok gave you with absolutely no videos, but you can follow them just for your records, okay? And once you do that, other similar accounts will pop up right under them. So start clicking through those accounts and finding more and more people. Just go through an endless rabbit hole. Just spend a lot of time scrolling and watching videos. It's just, you start with one and you just follow it to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. Just get really, really into watching TikTok videos. But that's how you would start. That's how I'd recommend you start.
So really what we're thinking about is let the algorithm work for you. But the advantage of setting up kind of a blank slate account is that then the algorithm is learning what you want on that particular account. So it's going to feed up to you like, oh, you're clearly interested in book influencers. Here's everybody that we have. So
And it will just keep going. It'll just keep going.
Now, as somebody, an author myself, who famously is not on TikTok, what happens to those of us who, either prefer to stay off social media entirely or only are on a certain types of social media? Do we have to be on Instagram or TikTok in order to work with influencers or take advantage of any of these sorts of services?
I would say that in this day and age, Instagram is basically like your website. So even though you don't have to be super active on Instagram, but you should have an Instagram presence, even if you're posting once a month or once every couple of months, right? I think that that's kind of where we're at. As far as TikTok goes, no, you do not need to be on TikTok. I think there's a group of people who are authors who should be on TikTok and a group that shouldn't be on it. So the group that should be on it, you have a life outside of writing your book that complements what your book is. So I'm going to give another, a similar example as before. My past client, Chelsea Fagan, she wrote a romance novel. It takes place in the Loire Valley in France. It has a beautiful cover, and her main character is an interior designer. She herself is really passionate about interior design and hosting. Her husband's French. She speaks fluent French, and she has a gorgeous home. And so she'll share videos of herself hosting, of herself like talking about French culture, all things that connect to her book. And it's made it so that she's grown quite a large following on TikTok without talking about her book more than probably 5% of the time. I would not recommend talking about your book specifically in a salesy way more than 10% of the time as far as your content goes. So for her, it makes a lot of sense for her to be on TikTok because she's kind of creating this persona where people feel like they know her. And when you know someone, you want to buy their book to support them. Now, on the other hand, one of my favorite romance writers in the world, I'm not going to name names, but she only posts about her books. It's all she posts about. She doesn't share anything else. And it comes across kind of salesy and just a little bit cheesy. It doesn't add anything, I think, to her social media presence. I think she'd be better off being anonymous. And so, or just commenting on people's videos that do review her books and saying thank you. So I do think that there is someone who could totally stay off social media versus people who, and I mean, stay off TikTok versus people who should be on it. And you can still work with influencers. So I was thinking about this, Erin, if I were you and I were to want to work with a TikTok influencer, what I would do is I would find those city influencers that do things that are like what I spent in a day in New York City, or how I'm doing a no spend month in New York City. Typically, these are not budget or personal finance influencers. They're just 24-year-old women creating videos about their lives on TikTok. I would send them a copy of Broke Millennial and a $10 gift card to a coffee shop because they're on a budget. They're going to think that was so nice of her to reach out to me. They may or may not already own your book, but they're not getting books sent to them all the time. And since they're and I think that they would feel a connection to you and they'd be likely to read and review your book, or at least show it what they're reading on their vlogs for people who are already following them.
First of all, love that. Now I might do it. But also, I think the point there too is that you don't have to just be focusing on influencers who are specific to quote unquote book talk in the sense that they only review books. You really should be thinking beyond like, okay, if I write historical fiction, who are the people that are on TikTok or Instagram who are history geeks, who are out there sharing all sorts of history, little bits of information and tidbits? Maybe they would be a really good person for me to partner with. So we really also want to make sure that as authors, we are being creative with the ways that we can be working not only with a marketing partner, or if we're trying to bootstrap it ourselves, how to work with influencers. Now, we have probably all heard in the news about this possible TikTok ban, which raises the question, how will that potentially impact this entire strategy? And will we just revert back to very traditional ways of promoting books?
Yeah, so, okay. When it comes to, as it pertains to the TikTok ban, there are a lot of influencers leaving TikTok just to post on Instagram and Instagram Reels, which are just short form videos on Instagram. And I think it's actually a huge opportunity to post on TikTok because people are still using the app. There's just less people creating on it. So right now is a really, really good time to post to TikTok. When you make a TikTok video, you can also save it when it's still in its drafts before it's watermarked, and you can post that simultaneously to Instagram Reels. So my suggestion would be, yes, make content for TikTok. However, make sure that you're also using that exact same content and putting it over on Instagram. Now, I know that some of you may be thinking, well, isn't that redundant? And won't the same people be sick of seeing your content twice? The people who are spending time on Instagram Reels aren't typically the people spending time on TikTok. So most likely people, except your close friends who are keeping tabs on you, will not see it twice and it won't be a big deal. But yes, it might get banned. I think it's unlikely. I do think that it's going to sell to some American company, hopefully not Meta, because that would be ridiculous. But I think it's still a good time to post to TikTok.
So what about beyond social media influencers? What other types of people should authors be considering working with when we're trying to get the word out about our books?
Yeah, so as far as outside of your niche goes, I think I gave some great examples to you as far as people who would still be reading your book, and anyone that's kind of in the same vicinity. So you mentioned historical fiction, historians who post to YouTube would be a great one. People who have just gotten back from a trip to where your book takes place would be a great one. I worked with a couple companies with some recent launches. So with the romance novel I did last summer, it was a perfect beach read. And so I partnered with a swimsuit brand. So as they were sending out their mailers to their influencers, we partnered with them so that they would also include the book so they'd have something to read on the beach, which was great. And then this past spring, I worked with an author who wrote the book, This Book Won't Burn, which is about book banning. And we partnered with Lingua Franca. They're a cashmere company worn by Michelle Obama, Simone Biles. And I know what you're thinking, that's so random. Actually, it's not. They do a lot of work with Pen America and working on book ban combating. And they make the sweaters, I read banned books. And they hosted us in their townhouse for a Q&A. So you just have to think a little bit about what would be a great potential partner. And then of course, book clubs, online book clubs. Yes, there is the, like, you know, the Reese Witherspoon book clubs or whatever, but those are typically taken care of by your publishing house. If you, I mean, they don't work with self-published authors. Those are taken care of by in-house marketing a year and a half in advance. But there are a lot of book clubs online that do have large audiences that are worth tapping. So my book club, for example, Bad Bitch Book Club, we have 25,000 members worldwide, and we do Zoom meetings every couple of weeks. The Literary League is another cool example of a book club that meets all around the country in real life. They have a monthly book club pick. And again, they're just a little bit more accessible than the gigantic book clubs, a little bit more. Try like a million times more accessible.
Well, you also just mentioned that those book clubs, the really big ones, like your Reese Witherspoons, for instance, publishers might be reaching out a year and a half in advance to try to get the timing right on that. And we had a great question come in about how far in advance of a pub date should an author or a marketing partner be reaching out to influencers? So actually, I'm going to two-prong this question. One, if I have a book coming out, at what point should I reach out to a marketing partner for help? And then two, if I'm trying to bootstrap this, when should I be reaching out to influencers myself?
So if you want to work with a marketing partner and you just want to do influencer outreach, 4 months out should be okay. 6 months is better, but 4 months would be okay. If you want to do an event with them, 6 months is like, it has to be at least 6 months, just because things book up so quickly. I feel like I'm missing part of your question. Oh, as far as influencer outreach, if you are self-published, I would say build out your lists 4 months in advance and then send all the outreach 2 months prior to your pub day.
Now, this might seem like a bit of a basic question, but for people who are just starting to learn how to build their own press list, how do you find the emails for people to reach out to, or are we just sliding into DMs?
No, it's hard. It's hard. And that's why you hire someone like me who has all the emails already. You are hopefully going to their Instagram page first, because there is a button on Instagram that says email this person. So you'll press that button and then their email address will come up. You just copy that and paste it into your Excel sheet. That's if you're lucky. That's like, yes, they have it so easy for me to find. Otherwise, sometimes it requires Googling them and looking for a personal website or an inquiry form and just going that way. It is time consuming. Doing this yourself is extremely time consuming. It's very possible, but there is a reason that people hire marketers.
I think sometimes, again, from this background of traditionally trained experience, you think like, oh, well, I shouldn't reach out to obviously multiple reporters at the same outlet. That's a really bad look. Or I want to be careful about really diversifying the type of outlets I'm reaching out to. So when it comes to influencers, is it okay to reach out to a whole bunch of people who are basically in what I would call the same vertical? Are you going to reach out to just a ton of book reviewers, or does that kind of look bad?
It doesn't look bad. It's totally fine. As long as you're sending those personalized emails, which you'll be able to do because you'll have all your notes ready to go, then no one's going to see it odd. Now, that said, you do not need to reach out to everybody at the same time. I think that there is a benefit to doing a trickle effect because it builds hype for your book already. So who I tend to reach out to first are like the 20 people I'm pretty certain will say yes to accepting a copy of this book and will most likely read it. And then hopefully they've told their friends about it and they'll be excited to receive my email a month or two down the line. But again, that's just manifesting, really. It doesn't offend anybody if you were to email all at once.
Now, we've talked a little bit about sending things to people. So are we talking digital copies? Are we talking physical copies? And you mentioned an influencer mailer earlier. What does that mean?
Yes. So hopefully your book's on NetGalley. I'm going to assume that most people know what that is, but if not, Edelweiss or NetGalley, they're review platforms that are really, really helpful. I believe there's a small fee to have your book up there, but I don't think it's I think it's definitely under $1,000. Probably much less than that. So what I tend to do is I offer people digital ARCs or physical ARCs. So they have kind of the choice. A lot of people do prefer to read on your Kindle, and it will save you a lot of money to have people read the digital copy, but I have physical copies available for people who want to read physical copies. And then of course, say you have an absolutely beautiful cover that someone's going to judge by the cover. You're going to want to get physical copies out there because the book itself, the look of it is going to be a marketing tool for you. And then okay, so you asked me digital or physical copy, but there was another part of that question. What was it?
So what is an influencer mailer?
Okay, an influencer mailer. Okay, so an influencer mailer is something that you send out to someone that you want to read your book, sometimes with little trinkets in it to really get their attention. So personally, I feel they are often really wasteful and terrible for the environment. Oftentimes I'll get one and I'll be like, why would they send me this? Like, why would they send me this? This is like a crime against the earth. So what I like to do is I like to have my authors send people books that can be sent via media mail. So a copy of their book wrapped in some sort of a ribbon or twine, whatever suits it more. And then I want them to stick in a handwritten note in there, thanking someone for reading their book. And I know what you're thinking, wow, my arm is going to hurt if I'm writing so many handwritten notes. Someone spending 8 to 12 hours reading your book, you can spend 30 seconds to write them a little handwritten note thanking them for their time, especially since you're not paying them to do it. I am probably 5 times more likely to read a book that is sent to me as someone who gets books sent to them every single day if it has a handwritten note attached. So that's a must. And that can be sent via media mail, which is very inexpensive. Now, if you have a VIP box, and for example, with the book we did last year, we sent some French chocolate, a beautiful candle, and some matches that were the book's cover to people that the author really, really wanted to review her book. Someone who, maybe an author, she wanted to blurb it, or someone that she thought maybe would post the package on social media. Typically, you would only send 5 to 10% of your mailers would be the VIP mailer, and they're much more expensive to send and create.
Now, a lot of this conversation has been around launching a book, but what happens if you launched your book and it came out and maybe it came out to a whimper instead of a bang? Is it okay to go back and, I don't want to say relaunch, but work with influencers to try to get buzz going about an already published book?
Absolutely. So hopefully at this point you have some traditional media mentions that would be helpful so you can use them to kind of get their attention. Like, hey, we won't even go to the New York Times, but like Travel and Leisure said this is one of the best beach reads of last year. I see that you have, I would love to send you a copy. Now, when it comes to relaunching or doing this second form of outreach, I would not focus on book influencers specifically, because as we've discussed, they're just a lot less likely to read anything that's sent to them. And they also are probably reading forward, so they're reading advanced copies for now. Instead, I would focus on kind of a secondary audience for you. So Broke Millennial came out when, Erin? At least 5 years ago, right?
Well, the first one came out in 2017.
Yeah, a long time ago, but it might be new to somebody else. It's just not going to be new to people who are reviewing books. So finding who that audience is for you that doesn't specifically just review them. So, we were talking about the historians. We are talking about the home decor influencers for this other person I'm working with. So finding out that secondary audience and doing a launch with them, because they're not necessarily looking for books that are published tomorrow.
Now, if you are interested in moving forward and working with a marketing partner, what are some of the best strategies for how to find and then also vetting a person and or an agency?
Yeah, so marketing, like book marketing, is still kind of a relatively new thing as far as like hiring an outside person. But there are a few companies I can send the links to you guys so that you can, or I can send a link to Author Skills so they can send it out to you. But one thing I would make sure is that they have experience, and a Google search will do, but you want to make sure that they have experience working with your specific genre, because it means that they'll already have existing contacts. And likely you'd be familiar with the books they've worked with, so you can see like, oh, was this successful? Did a lot of people talk about it? So that you could move forward. So yes, making sure that they have experience in your genre is really, really important. And making sure that they read your book partially, at least a few chapters of it, so that they can tell you enthusiastically they like it, because you don't want someone marketing your book that doesn't have any kind of passion for it.
Which I feel like sometimes happens with in-house marketing.
Oh my gosh, always, all the time, all the time. They're overworked and they have too many books.
What are some signs that we can look out for that might indicate that a person is being a tad hyperbolic with their success rate or the services that they offer, and maybe they're not going to deliver?
If they have no social media following themselves. Look, you don't have to have a big social media following to tell me that you can market, but I need to believe that you actually can market something, and like yourself, especially as a professional, especially as an entrepreneur, is the first sign of that. I have on Instagram just 13,000 followers, but that's 13,000 followers. That's enough to prove that I have connections and I know how to build relationships on social media. So if someone has no following at all, it doesn't mean they can't do their job, but I'd proceed with caution. And if you've never heard of any of the books that they've marketed, of course, if you're not a reader, which I doubt is anyone in this group, then maybe you wouldn't have heard of them, but you should have heard of at least a couple of the books that they've worked with, so that you know that people will hear about your book.
And when we're defining, and I know this can be relative based on genre and niche on social media, but when we're talking about a big following, what does that mean, particularly for influencers? What is going to equate to that person maybe having some influence and having a big following?
So I actually think that people who, and it's been proven time and time again, that people who have micro followings are actually a lot more likely to move the needle. So that means anywhere from 5,000 to 50,000 followers, because those people, the people who follow them, they trust them more. They feel like there's a connection. They don't think they're being sold something necessarily. All of my book recommendations that I accept, for the most part, come from my friend Jess, who has 9,000 followers on Instagram. I guarantee you that when she posts about a book, at least 20 people add that book to her cart, and then they go and they tell all their friends about it. So high engagement is helpful, but just because someone has 1 million followers does not mean they will sell your book. I would maybe, especially if you're building these lists yourself, see if you're engaged with their content. Like, are you watching? Can you take your eyes away from their videos? Are they engaging you, or are they boring you? If you want to watch more and more of their content, then you're probably among many people who enjoy watching their content and will probably buy their books or their book recommendations.
Now, I do feel like sometimes we think of social media as very much a young person's game, particularly when it comes to influencers. But are there influencers out there who are, let's say, targeted more in like the 60 plus demographic?
Yes. Yes. Way more. My parents, they made a TikTok 2 summers ago. They live on a boat and they decided to share their boat life. Within a week, they had 30,000 followers. I had been working my whole life at this. And at that point, I had like 50,000 followers on TikTok. People love to see people who are outside of the typical influencer age living their life and doing cool things on social media. If anything, I think it's a huge advantage. And I have a theory for that, which is I think people they like something to aspire to, but not people their own age. So yes, there's very, very much the space people are of all ages are on social media and they like following people their own age, and also people like on social media like to look up to someone. So if you are like, I am 75, why would anyone want to see me on TikTok? I bet you have a really cool kitchen that they'd love to see. I bet you have a really cool office that you write from that they'd love to see. I bet you have really awesome stories that they'd love to hear that would do extremely well on social media.
I also just have to plug, there's a gentleman that I follow who all he does is make milkshakes and floats. And every week it's two different kinds. They are so creative. It's very cute. And I think the other part of it is not everyone who is in the 60 plus demographic has to be creating wholesome content to like lean into the grandma grandpa thing. That's not what we're saying. But that there like that is also a niche, people who want that kind of content. But then there's niche for people who are just living their absolute best lives in a way that almost feels antithetical to what traditionally you would be seeing somebody doing. So definitely second on the fact that don't let age be a hindrance and think that you're not going to be able to build a following just because you feel like you're older than the traditional age of the people on the platform.
Yep.
Now, speaking though of older demographics, if you're, let's say, a children's book author, you obviously can't really market directly to kids because kids shouldn't be on certain social media platforms at a young age. So, how do you then maybe market to the parents or grandparents to think about buying a children's book?
Work with moms. I post all the time. I'm a book influencer, right? And I have a son. He's 8 months old, and I was actually thinking of making a TikTok literally tomorrow on books that I think are actually really great gifts for baby showers, because I have really strong opinions on this. You don't want to give someone a classic. They already have a copy of The Very Hungry Caterpillar. So I think working with parents, and specifically parents whose values you align with, I don't show my son's face on social media, but I still talk about parenting all the time, is super, super beneficial. Yeah, work with the parents for sure, because they're the ones with the money.
Now, I feel like we've talked about a few different genres, a few different niches, but do you feel like there are only certain genres that this strategy works well for? Let's say romance, for instance, and others that like, you're probably not going to see a return working with social media influencers or focusing your energy with online stuff?
No, I don't see that at all, because there's people in every community and every niche online. Some are easier than others for me. Like I would
Sure.
have a very difficult time marketing like a fantasy novel, because I don't read fantasy. So I'd have a hard time coming up with comp titles. And so I don't work with fantasy authors because I don't read fantasy. So I wouldn't do a very good job for them. But I think it's just that's just again a matter of finding yourself the marketer that is a good fit for you.
That's also a great recommendation to make sure that the author has worked with your genre before, which is, I feel like, similar advice to if you're going to hire a CPA, find somebody who knows how to work with royalties and knows how to work with somebody who earns variable income. You know, just doing that vetting process to make sure you're finding people who know how to work with your type of thing. What are your thoughts on YouTube for marketing?
Oh, I mean, it's great. It's never going away. I am not like much of a YouTube connoisseur. It's not my specialty. So if someone wanted someone who was like an expert in YouTube, they wouldn't pick me, but I can do secondary YouTube help. I have a list of YouTubers I can work with. But that long form content, I mean, it does sell books. But if you're gonna make YouTube content, you've got to be really good at like editing. And it's definitely harder to create content for YouTube, which is why those who do it tend to do pretty well for themselves.
Agreed. It is a lot of work to try to do it for yourself. All right. If you had to choose one way for an author to promote themselves, what would that be?
Oh, share your life. Share your life. You can choose what to withhold. But sharing your life and building relationships with influencers, be part of the community. Comment on people's videos, get to know them better. And when you do so, they'll be much more likely to recognize your name when you do reach out and want to help you out. But just start commenting, start building relationships, start posting your own stuff. Just become part of the community, because you can't simply insert yourself into something and ask for a favor and expect to be welcomed.
I definitely agree with engagement. I think that that's so important. And tying back to with the outreach of, as somebody who gets a lot of inbound requests too, having just a line in there to make it personalized, that you actually know who the person is and have admired something about their work, makes them much more likely to maybe do you a favor or promote your book.
A million times more likely. Hello, book reviewer. I have a book coming out. Like, that's not going to work.
Now, historically, celebrities have obviously been people that marketers have worked with to try to get folks to buy things. So, should we ever be targeting celebrities on social media, or no, we want to be focusing with internet celebrities, which are the influencers?
Yeah, don't bother with real celebrities. Don't even bother. They're not accessible. They only work through publicists. When you have to go through someone else to get to someone, it's just way too much effort.
I agree. And we've had some questions too about the level of safety that you maybe want to put in place if you're going to start sharing parts of your life. So, what are some of your best practice recommendations for what to share, what feels safe to share? You just mentioned you talk about being a mom, but you don't post your son's photo. Like, that's one good example of kind of a barrier that you have. So, for people who are thinking about sharing their lives, what are maybe some best practices for also being safe about it?
Yes, don't share photos of the outside of your home. Or videos of the outside of your home. When I make vlogs about, which is a video blog about what a day in my life looks like, I don't show any, I live in New York City. I don't show any videos of the exact street I live on. And if I do show, a favorite coffee shop or something, I don't mention that I go every day. So just like kind of making it so that people can't necessarily find where you live, and anything that you really want to keep private, you choose to keep private. So my son has my husband's last name. I don't share my husband's last name on social media, so no one can assume my son's last name. Just little things you put in place that you just wouldn't want every single person to know about you. But yeah, the biggest thing though is don't share pictures of the outside of your house.
Now, if we're going to think about identifying a measure of success for an influencer marketing initiative, we've had a couple comments come in, and understandably so. It's a lot of work, especially if you're going to try to bootstrap this. Even if you are not sending any physical copies, you're exclusively sending things digitally. Even if you PDF it and send it via an email, you're not even doing a NetGalley, so you're saving costs there. It's still many, many hours of your life to identify influencers, find their contact information, etc. So how do you personally define success for a campaign that you're working on?
Yeah, so typically I'll come up with some sort of Goodreads review, like a rating goal before launch day. So a book I worked on last year, it was a self-published author. Our goal was 100 reviews before launch day. And then once we hit 100, we were like, okay, 500 reviews before launch day. We set reasonable goals for ourselves that was probably the best way we could measure it, was just based on reviews, because the only people reading the book before it came out were likely people that we had sent it to. So that's the easiest way to track it, of course. And then from there, just seeing the organic traction that comes from it. With marketing, it's really hard to see a really, really direct result from your efforts. But if you don't even plant the seeds, like, nothing can grow. And this is just you planting the seeds for people to hear about your book. Because lightning isn't just going to strike, it's not, nothing comes out of nothing. So it's worth doing. It is long, it is tiring, but it's kind of the only way to ensure that at least some people hear about your book, especially given just how many books are published each year.
I agree. And I'm also, in terms of timing, I understand that a lot of the numbers that have gone thrown out in terms of cost feel really expensive to a fair amount of people who are watching. It's not within the budget, particularly if you didn't get a big chunk of an advance. And even if you did, there are other places that that advance might need to be going, including, I don't know, living expenses. So do you have a thought about if you want to try in earnest to move the needle a little bit on social media for your book, how many hours should you commit to putting aside to making that happen for yourself?
Let's see. At least 40 hours. Like at least a full week of 9 to 5 work doing this. But you know, the search for influencers, especially if you're doing this by yourself, like on your own, it's kind of an ongoing thing. Once the algorithm learns who you are, you're going to discover people and then you're going to shoot them an email. But to actually put down the foundation to get this done, at least 40 hours. And if you want to work with someone like me, like I do consulting. So if you wanted to be like, hey, can I have 2 hours of your time and I'll come with questions and I'll tell you a little bit about my book. I mean, I thought of the idea for Erin's like marketing campaign pretty much on the spot. So I don't mind talking to someone for a couple hours if they're going to do all the execution of the work. So there might be someone who you just want to talk to, who you just want to consult with, who can just get you in the right direction so that you feel emboldened and empowered to do this on your own.
I do feel like that's a great recommendation for indie authors. You know, I get that sometimes it feels like we're talking so often to traditionally published when we speak about advances. But on the flip side, if you are self-published, if you are an indie author, if you got such a modest advance, it like doesn't even really matter. You do still have to make a decision about how much you personally want to financially invest into your book. And marketing and publicity is a huge part of what moves the needle on book sales. And this is just sort of the new world that we are encountering, where maybe going on Good Morning America, if you could get on, good for you. If you hired a publicist and were able to get on, used to be what made, you know, thousands and thousands of sales. Not necessarily the case anymore. And I do feel like we as authors have to adapt as well about if we want to bootstrap it, we absolutely can. But then time, our time, which is valuable, is the cost. Or you can outsource the problem and spend the money to hire somebody to take care of that for you. You just want to make sure to be vetting that person very carefully. And it's a great recommendation too on consulting. I really love that idea that if you just want to get in a room and have a brainstorm with somebody. Now, I also just want to be clear, the 40 hours, not implying that you have to do it all in 1 week. It's that's the amount of time it will take. So making sure that you are able to spend, whether it's an hour a day for weeks and weeks, and you just need to backwards plan that or what have you. It's not a suggestion that you shut down your life for a full week and work a 9 to 5 doing the research. All right, as we're starting to wind down here a little bit, any other thoughts or things that you want to share with our audience, particularly any ideas around like fees or ways to be ideating?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely get a lot of quotes. There is no one size fits all as far as what people are charging for these services. A lot of these marketing companies are like, they have a ton of people that work for them. And so they have a lot of operation costs, but others are just like myself who has other projects that they work on. This is just one of the many things. And so I have time for consulting calls, but I don't, more so than I do the resources to take on a client for a full quarter. So there's a lot of different things out there and a lot of people charge different rates. Mine might be a little bit high. I would say valuable because I have a giant book club. I have a big following on social media, so I have kind of a 360 view. But there are variations there. I will also say in regards to creating content, because this is a really good piece of advice. You will suck at it at first. You will suck at it until you're good at it. You just have to make some really bad content, just some really janky, poorly edited TikTok videos. And then one day you're going to be like, oh, I'm pretty good at this actually. But you just have to start being really bad at it, be bad at it until you're good at it. Just keep practicing because that's the only way to get good at it. And it's so worth it.
I love that. And I also think everybody who's been leaving some comments about this sparking ideas for them for kind of how to diversify out who they would be reaching out to personally, particularly if you don't have the budget to hire somebody. I love this comment somebody left. I've got a gut loathing of TikTok, but while listening to this webinar, I went on and searched up Gen X tags and found all kinds of kindred spirits reminiscing about the 80s. Even though my new book isn't even set in the 80s, I'm now planning to reach out to some of them, even if there's nothing literary about their account, which is so much the point. And I love that. I love that that was my takeaway.
Yeah, find your peers, find your community. They're going to want to read your book.
And that is a really great point too, that this person brought up, that if you're, okay, your book's not set in the 80s, but perhaps your book is set in a different era or, about a certain genre, that you can find people who are really interested in that or practicing whatever that thing is on social media. Those can also be the people that are going to be promoting your book.
Absolutely. Or say you're writing a book that has musicians in it. Like, what if you found a trumpet player? Say you have a trumpet player in your book, find one and be like, hey, I wrote a book. It has a trumpet player in it. Do you want to read an advanced copy? And also maybe you can let me know if any of this isn't like super accurate to your experience, because you can still make edits to an advanced copy. So there's really so much that can be done.
And then last question too, before we have to head off, in terms of vetting, because again, we just want to make sure everybody is working with somebody ethical and above board. Do you feel like it's fair to ask a marketing partner, could you give me a referral? Are there previous folks that you've worked with that I could speak to directly?
You can ask that. They might not be able to provide that, but you can always ask.
And then in terms of seeing their launches, do you feel like everybody pretty much posts the work that they've done? Or sometimes we're working behind the scenes, so maybe they're not posting about it so much?
I share nothing on my website. Nothing, on purpose. Not because I'm not proud of the work we've done, because I am very proud, but because we're a bespoke service. We're a really bespoke service. I only work with up to 2 clients a quarter. It's kind of a, if you know, you work with me thing. And so I don't really have anything to prove, because I'm not trying to get clients from my website specifically. That's just me. That's just my way I do things.
And I think the word of mouth point is a great one, that if you want to work with someone like this, put your feelers out within your author community, see if anybody has ever worked with someone, or maybe can refer you to somebody just to consult with for a period of time to get your own juices flowing about how you can do this yourself. Mackenzie, thank you so much for being here. This was really informative, and I hope everyone tuning in enjoyed as well.
My pleasure. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Thank you, Erin. It's covered a lot of bases, a lot of new information for me and for a lot of the audience as well. And everyone, please feel free to go to authorsguild.org and look at resources, past webinars. There's check boxes where you can narrow the results, and one of the topics is marketing and publicity. So some of you are asking about book launch events and things like that. There's also publicity things like writing essays and op-eds. Good stuff in there. But always feel free to reach out if you have questions of any way you were looking for something or would like the Authors Guild to do new programming. We're all ears. Thank you again, and have a good day, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much.